Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Barry Prentice. I am a professor at the Asper School of Business, Supply Chain Management at the University of Manitoba, and also the president of Isopolar. Between the two entities, we are organizing this webinar today. It wasn't a plan to have a webinar right now. In fact, we were going to meet in person. That was going to be in Montreal on these very same dates. But as things happened with the Ukraine invasion and still some questions about the pandemic, it was decided that we would postpone the in-person conference to October 20th, 21st, which we are going to do. And instead, we would have a webinar at this time, since a lot of people had been anticipating this conference, which in fact itself had been delayed 2 years. The pandemic has taken a great toll on our plans. In any case, we do welcome you all here, and thank you for attending. This webinar is also a sort of celebration. It was 20 years ago this year that the University of Manitoba held the very first Airships to the Arctic Conference. This was an effort to try and bring the attention to the airships as a solution to climate change in the North. At that time, there were still lots of skeptics. No one really was certain, was climate change really happening? Was it not happening? But we could see at that time already that the winter roads were already losing a lot of their season. Climate change was having some impact. And we looked to the future to say, well, what are we going to do when the winter roads are not going to operate? And of course, the answer we had was to have the airships as a solution to that. So that's where we started out. Over time, we've had a number of conferences, and of course, the interest in airships has grown greatly. It's increased substantially because of climate change and the ability of the airships to, first of all, not consume much fuel because the lift is free, but now we're seeing the airship industry moving to electric propulsion with hydrogen as the source of fuel, and as a result, zero carbon emissions. So there's a lot of positivity about airships, not just to serve the North, but also as a solution to climate change itself, and perhaps to replace some of the other means of transport like cargo jets, which of course are quite polluting. We do welcome you also as part of Isopolar. This is a non-for-profit entity that was set up to encourage airships. The membership is free, and please take advantage of that if you have an opportunity. At this point, I'd like to introduce Nathan Smith. Nathan has worked with me on some of the blogs you'll see on the Isopolar website, one of our hardworking committee members. And without further ado, Nathan, I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. I'm Nathan Smith. I'm a PhD economist. I used to teach in university. Now I do some sort of technology policy consulting, mostly in telecommunications, but I have a longstanding interest in airships. I worked for an airship startup back in 2007. We had some dreams of building some giant airships, and I was the head of market research there. So I've been thinking a lot about the demand side, which is the focus of the session this morning. And I'm trying to establish myself as a bit of a promoter, so I post a lot on LinkedIn. So if you think this is interesting, then just definitely feel free to jump on and follow me in LinkedIn. So a few things about the session. The Q&A is where I'll be looking for questions to ask to the panelists. We would love to see people using the chat a lot, but we think of it as kind of as a thought bank that we can circle back to after the conference to see what impressions people have had, what questions have arisen, and so forth. But if you want a question to be asked to the panelists, put it in the Q&A. We'll start with Katrina Nokleby, and just so that you can know a little bit about her. Katrina Nokleby is the member of the Legislative Assembly for the District of Great Slave in Yellowknife. Elected in 2019, Katrina sits on the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. And she attended the recent climate change conference in Glasgow as a guest of the Great Northwest Territories Department of Energy and Natural Resources. Before entering politics, Katrina worked as a consulting engineer in the North with 13 years of field and project management experience in the environmental, geological, and ice engineering fields. And during that time, she volunteered with and served as a counselor for NAPEG. She also serves as deputy chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. And one of her main reasons for entering the political arena was to bring an engineering perspective to the world of government and leadership. So I'm very eager to hear what she has to say about airships and the North.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I like to consider myself a Jill of all trades and master of none. So I'm not going to come here, I think, today and tell you much about what I know about airships, which is very little, actually. I did do a statement in the House last session about it in preparation for this. So what I am going to talk about today is the issues facing the Northwest Territories and sort of our problems that perhaps the airships could be a good solution for. And I'm hoping that maybe you can share that back with me, whether or not I should be pushing this in the legislature for my colleagues. So I'm just going to figure out here how to share my screen. All right. So while my presentation is titled Problems and Solution of Disappearing Ice, I'm really not going to talk a lot about ice per se. I'm going to talk more about generally the climate change impacts that we are seeing in the Northwest Territories and perhaps the issues that you can help us with. So as you can see, I am a professional engineer. I am non-practicing. I worked very hard for that designation, so I continue to use it throughout my time as a politician. Being in politics has been very interesting. So if anybody would like to follow up on that conversation at a later date, feel free to hit me up on social media or through my email at the end of the presentation. So I just wanted to start by giving everyone a background about our winter road network in the Northwest Territories. If you're not familiar with winter roads or ice roads, they are seasonal roads that are built every year in order to connect some of our communities. And this is a map of the Beaufort Delta area, which is on the northern coast of the Northwest Territories bordering the Yukon. As you can see there, and I'm sorry for cutting off the legend, just I wanted to make it large enough here, but anything that's in purple dash line is an ice road or a winter road. So that community there of Aklavik is serviced by an ice road in the winter time. Otherwise, it's a fly-in only community. If you look, we also used to have Tuk on the northern coast. It used to be an ice road only community as well. However, recently we built the Inuvik to Tuk Highway, which was quite an engineering feat from a permafrost perspective. And I encourage you to Google that if you'd like to hear more information about it. Notably, we have 3 communities off to the side there on the eastern part of the map, and those are all fly-in only communities. So as you can see, we're heavily reliant on ice and on airplanes to fuel our communities, and ships to get supplies in, etc. So as the climate continues to change, we're really seeing a huge impact on our transportation system. I'm just going to move to the next slide here, which is the central and southern portions of the NWT. Here you can see that we have a lot more ice roads servicing our communities. The ones that are sort of highlighted over in red are ones that we're currently discussing as permanent infrastructure. The one on the western part of the map is the Mackenzie Valley Highway. So as you can see, there's 5 communities there that are all only serviced by ice roads in the winter. Otherwise, everything is flown in. So you can imagine the cost of doing everything there. We also have a bunch of communities there on the eastern part of the territory that are also only serviced by an ice road. We just recently built the permanent road to Wati there. So we are starting to move forward. That was a P3 partnership in order to have an all-season road that will service those communities and extend the life of the ice road when it is built. As you can see, though, we have a very lack of permanent infrastructure. Most of our roads are gravel that we do have. This leads to a lot of maintenance and upkeep costs, as well as a lot of damage to my truck, as I like to drive around a bunch and see different places. So as I was saying, we're experiencing unprecedented climate change in the north at a much greater rate than other places in the world. We have increased precipitation and extreme weather events, which has recently led to extreme flooding in our rivers and lakes, particularly over the last 2 years, and most recently in the South Slave in this past month. And I'm going to show you some footage of that in a minute here. We have a huge amount of coastal erosion up on the Arctic Ocean, particularly in Tuktoyaktuk. We also see permafrost degradation across the territory, which is having a few impacts on us. Clearly, we have slumping, so that's impacting our few roads, such as the Dempster Highway and others. We also have a threat to our infrastructure, buildings, etc. And then the cost to accommodate now and design for melting and changing permafrost, unstable permafrost, discontinuous permafrost, is becoming more prohibitive as time goes on, and really is taxing the capacity, I think, of our resources in the north. So I just wanted to share this footage here that was taken, as you can see, in May, and just this month, so probably about 2 weeks ago now. This is the community of Hay River on the South Slave. It's on the south shore of Great Slave Lake, and obviously, as it's titled, it sits on the Hay River. And this year, the Hay River flooded in a manner that has never been seen before. So what you're seeing here as I animate this, and I hope it's coming across, is on the right is the ice-jammed river. So the Hay River, and then on the left is what was our burgeoning agriculture sector being flooded out. So you can see the greenhouses, you can see shop buildings on the left. You can see, I think that was a crop area there on the left that we just passed. This is only a small portion of the area that is flooded. The entire town itself is flooded, and this is an area that has not shown historic flooding in the past. So not only are we seeing flooding in areas that we typically expect, and most of our communities are built on floodplains, we are also now finding it in places that we've never seen it before. And we have to ask, has this been an issue with some of the work upstream with the Site C Dam? There's been a lack of dredging in the channels of the river for the last so many years after the federal government stopped paying for it. We had devolution about 6 years ago now, 7 years ago now, 6. And that has really caused the territory to have to take on a lot of things themselves. And as a result, I think this is what we're seeing. I think I'll just move on from that. I suggest this is from a fellow named Aaron Tamber. If you'd like, he took tons of footage during this flooding, and it was apocalyptic. I mean, it wasn't flooding in the summer, it was flooding while the snow was coming down in the middle of the night. And there's going to be a lot of, I think, residual trauma left over from this. So moving on to the next example of our issues here in the territory is the Tuktoyaktuk coastal erosion. So the map on the right, which I took from Andrzejczyk and Smith, shows the difference in the coastline on the community of the hamlet of Tuk from 1950 versus 2002. So this is already 20 years out of date. So you can imagine this tiny spit of land is already probably impacted quite a bit more. So the erosion rate in the hamlet is 1 meter per year, which is just remarkable when you consider how slow some geological processes go. Tuk Island, which is the little portion you can kind of see in the northeast of the map, actually is eroding at a greater rate, so double at 2 meters per year, and is expected to be completely gone by 2050. It is currently protecting a good portion of the hamlet itself. So once that happens, it will speed up the loss of the community. The current estimate of just finding a quick fix solution to stop it for now was $42 million before the pandemic. So at this point, it's unknown what it would cost. And then for a permanent fix, I imagine we're into hundreds of millions, if not more, in costs. This one is a video that I did get from a fellow at the Geological Survey here in the Northwest Territories. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It does have his voiceover, and it is quite impactful. And it just talks a little bit about permafrost slumping and how rapidly it can all change here as we go. So I'm just going to let that play for a few minutes here so you can see the video, and then I'll move past it because I'm conscious of time.
In July 2015, a small lake in the Peel Plateau region of Canada's Northwest Territories drained because a large permafrost thaw slump eroded its shoreline. A small pond remains in the drained lake basin, and a cavity visible in the foreground developed when the lake poured its waters into the expanding thaw slump over a period of less than a few hours. This thaw slump has grown over time as ice-rich permafrost underlying the landscape.
Oh, my apologies. I'm trying to look at the chat while that's going on. So anyway, I won't continue on with this because I am conscious of time, but that someone did ask, what is a slump? So this is exactly what a slump is. And one of the issues with permafrost and thaw-sensitive soils is that once you cut into them, the degradation and the geomorphologic process becomes very accelerated. So what's happened here and what Dr. Coquel talks about is that once this lake drained and the debris flow occurred down the valley, it ended up blocking another small river or small creek. And with the backup of that creek, what ended up happening was creating additional thawing and slumping from the creek as the water ponded at the base of the slope. So this is a concern for any type of construction that we do in the Northwest Territories, and why I had mentioned the Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway earlier. It's an entirely fill highway constructed on top of the tundra in order to prevent any sort of permafrost degradation. Unfortunately, there was budget issues, and the fill that was placed was cut down, and now we are seeing degradation of the highway and ponding with water, which is creating geotechnical issues for the highway and more costs to us as a government. So moving on, the next issue, no, I don't want to play that again. So let's see if it, there we go. Another major issue that maybe people wouldn't think about when they think of the Northwest Territories is our unsettled land claims, and how those really do affect us when it comes to transportation and our infrastructure, is that we're unable to relocate our communities out of the floodplains or climate sensitive areas, because the surrounding land is often tied up in the land claim process. So for example, Jean Marie River, which flooded out very terribly last year, and I went to visit this year, and luckily the flooding broke, or the rivers broke well this year in favor of them, and they didn't flood out. But when I asked why they're literally on the floodplain, as a geotechnical engineer, I was aghast to see this community settled here, situated here. And they told me they can't move because all the surrounding land is part of the withdrawal of the land claim. And therefore, even though it will become their land and the band's land at one point, the only option for them at this point is a land transfer. So that would then mean Crown land in the middle of their community. So, which is not useful to them either. So it's created a lot of issues there. It also creates issues around our economy, because we have all this land and we're unable to access much of it for development or mineral resource extraction, which is our driver of our economy. With our diamond mines sunsetting soon, we are facing an economic outbreak, or a future that looks quite bleak, as I mentioned in the next line there. So we even have less money for infrastructure, and we're already in quite a deficit, as you can see from just the roads perspective, but we also have a lot of other deficits in infrastructure. And what this also does, it creates an atmosphere of over consultation and engagement. So it creates a burnout almost with Indigenous governments and organizations, as they constantly try to react and input on all of the information that the government presents to them over time. And really it becomes challenging then in order to move anything forward, including climate adaptation and mitigation. So, rightfully so, I have nothing but support for the Indigenous governments in their negotiations with the Crown. Moving on, we have other issues that affect the NWT, and one I mentioned was our infrastructure deficit is our power. Currently, we pay 31 cents a kilowatt hour here in Yellowknife for power. I believe in BC you might be paying 6. So as you can imagine, our power bills are astronomical. This leads to a lot of lack of investment in the Northwest Territories. We need to expand our Tallston hydroelectricity dam in the South Slave. It is near Hay River there, Pine Point. But the cost of that project is greater than $1 billion, and needs to have mines as consumers set up prior to its expansion, and for us to get the money to be committed. As I mentioned, the reason that this is so important is that 20 of our communities of the 33 in the territory are thermal communities. And so that means that they're reliant on diesel or fuel for their power and heating. This not only has a cost ramification, as we have no pipelines in the territory, so we bring all of that fuel in by truck or barge, but it has a huge economic cost in that we're burning fuel. There has been progress made on high energy and efficiency batteries storage packs, so the diesel can be turned off. But one of the sort of the conundrums is that no matter what we do, we'll always have to have diesel backup in high Arctic communities in the event that the power goes out during the winter. Another major issue for us in the territory is our food insecurity, and it's the fragility of that was really heightened during the pandemic. If you Google me, I used to be a minister. That's another whole story for a different day, but I was the minister responsible for basically all of the supply chain during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And it was shocking to me when I sat on my federal, provincial, territorial tables about how reliant Canada was on the south of Mexico and the US for our food supply, temporary foreign workers to pick our own crops, and then throw us on at the end of the line up in the Northwest Territories, where, you know, if these small airplane charter companies go out of business, communities become stranded. So it really sort of impressed upon me how interconnected everything is in the Northwest Territories. So, you know, one area with airships, you know, could be that it could help us with some of our food security issues. As I mentioned, the global supply chain was a real concern during the pandemic and is only increasingly concerning afterwards. The cost of construction materials is skyrocketing. So is the demand for all of that. That then again allows us, creates a problem for us trying to build infrastructure. Our federal capital money rarely comes with operations and maintenance funding. We always have to come up with that money on our own. And generally our funding formula is a 75-25% split, which means the GNWT must put up the 25% dollars for any infrastructure project. So you can imagine 25% of over $1 billion for a much needed hydroelectric expansion is very cost prohibitive to a territory that's barely able to graduate people at, you know, greater than a 57% rate. So, you know, and it's very hard for me as a scientific background person who sees that the lack of infrastructure is impacting social issues to press for roads when people need houses and other such things. But I always say, how much is your house going to cost when you have to fly all those materials in if we don't do something about our infrastructure deficit? And then our fiscal outlook is grim. We're at the limit for our borrowing. I think we're at $1.9 billion. So we've been downgraded in our bond ratings. So economically, the territory is not looking wonderful. So that's creating some problems as well. I do see, so question in the chat was, do I see the future for small modular reactors for hydro in the north? So you're talking of nuclear reactors or small hydro, sorry. I'm just looking to see who asked me that. Oh, I don't. So anyway, I do see a need for nuclear, the small batteries, but you can't say the word nuclear in the Northwest Territories without creating a huge amount of controversy. Yeah, nuclear. So yeah, so while I do think that actually it is a solution for the territory, especially when, you know, if it is such a small unit as a you know, CCAN type size, and there is any issue, it can be contained. However, it is really a hot button topic here. And we had someone come speak at our NAPEG conference and he got like booed out of town at a public venue. So, you know, concerning. The geothermal question for the thermal communities is an interesting one. We don't have a lot of high groundwater recharge in the territory, so that creates a bit of an issue because it's my understanding for thermal, a lot of it is the movement of the water and an extraction of the heat from the water. It has been looked at, and we do have a geothermal anomaly in the Decho, so the southwestern portion of the territory, but really hasn't been explored. Again, lack of capacity, lack of resources. To me, I think the solution there is to partner with universities in order to have them fund some of that research. And we do have great permafrost and soil science partnerships happening with Waterloo, sorry. Oh, it's going to escape me, Laurier University and others that are here doing work in the territory. So I do think that that is something we're going to have to continue to push for if we want to have any sort of research being done on this. And then I just wanted to add that we have one of the highest rates of social issues in the Northwest Territories: addictions, mental health issues, suicide, domestic violence, and sexual assault. So while this is a conference on climate change and ice roads and disappearing ice, it does play into this conversation. One of the issues around even opening up a road is, you know, the access that brings to small communities, drug dealers, you know, people coming in and taking advantage of vulnerable people, things like that. So even just something as simple as building a road can have quite a controversial discussion around it. So another way that I see that airships may be a way to go as far as supply issues without having to build that infrastructure. So this slide I threw together at the end because I really am new to airships, and you know, I hope or wish that I had more time to participate in the conference so I could learn more about whether they would work for us. But these are what I sort of see as the pros and cons at the moment. Was the less infrastructure intensive. We have a major airport expansion happening up in Inuvik, which has permafrost, ice-rich soils, which is already proving to be difficult to come up with a design for. So that could potentially be a solution there. It does minimize the disturbances to thaw sensitive permafrost soils if you don't have to build permanent infrastructure. We have a lot of remote contaminated sites that continue to need to be cleaned up, as well as exploration projects that currently use small aircraft. Definitely airships could be a way for them to be helped in that. And as I said, it reduces the needs for the roads and the associated costs. I guess my questions to you as a conference would be, is the cold weather tested and proven? Is the technology going to work for us when it is -40 out and the wind is blowing, when the power source may not be so steady as we move into electric options? So that's always a neat reason. And I'll get a plug in that the Northwest Territories is open for cold weather testing as well. It is a business and economic arm that we are looking at. And we have recently had the Korean military come and test an airplane. We've had Porsche come in the past. So, it is a great place to come and experience the North and test your cold weather vehicles if you're interested. As I said, I'm not certain what kinds of costs or infrastructure would be needed in order to support airships. Obviously, if we move to electric ones, there'd be charging stations, et cetera, that would be required. So that would be something I'd be interested in. And further, I think that residents would still want to have roads in the sense of they want to communicate with or be able to travel. And I never heard so much excitement as when that road to Inuvik opened from Tuck, and basketball teams were able to come down on a bus and play each other. So so that actually is the end of my formal part of my presentation. I see there's a question there. So I've got my contact there up. Would the construction of an airship hangar depot in the NWT be considered under infrastructure or transportation, and how can? So we only have a Department of Infrastructure, so that does make it kind of nice. They combined Public Works and DOT into infrastructure, so it would just be under one department. We are currently actually doing an airport upgrade or starting the works to upgrade the Yellowknife Airport. So, if it were something that is feasible here, why could we not incorporate an airship sector or section of that airport as we do the expansion? So I'd be very happy to put some people in touch with the right people here. An eco-energy option for Northern Canada. So I appreciate that link I think someone put in. I don't see it as being active, but I can, oh, here we go. So I will look at that after the conference. And so I should sort of explain here that my role is a regular member, and we are a consensus style government. We don't have a party system. So I'm one person of the opposition, so to speak, to then push my government to do things. So I kind of waved my hand when someone said, oh, are we part of the government or not? We kind of are. We wear all of the things that the government does, but really all my avenue is to press and push my colleagues to look at new things and then vote out their budgets if they don't listen to me. So it is quite an interesting process. As an engineer coming into politics, our skill set is a little different, and people don't really like to hear things super bluntly sometimes. So I think that's been my learning curve. So I'm going to probably just leave it there and just see if there's any other further questions or comments. I'm not even sure where I'm at for time. So
Katrina, thanks. Yeah, that was fascinating, and I like that you've clearly put some thought already into the effects that cargo airships could have on the logistics, specifically of Northwest Territories. And yeah, I think they could potentially reduce carbon emissions and help with some of the climate change in general, reducing climate change, but that's pretty slight, and there's probably not a lot that you could do to bring that about. But on the side of, say, something like food insecurity, making it easier to supply communities during the winter months, that definitely is something that that airships would be able to help with. As far as infrastructure needs, I think it's mostly it will depend a lot on the design. So if it's a hybrid, it might need a short runway. If it's pure lighter than air airship, it might need a mast. So that's a complicated conversation. But in general, there's a good reason to think that cargo airships would need less infrastructure investment than certainly than a road to a remote location or than an airport. So that's part of the promise of airships. So yeah, well, let me see. You've already answered most of the questions that came in during your presentation. So we may get more, and we'll see if we have some time at the end for more questions. But I'll go ahead and move on to our next presenter.
Can I
If
just
that's
jump
all
in?
right. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to close out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if anybody does want to follow up on anything further that I've said, feel free to send me an email. I'm used to being an 18-hour-a-day consultant, so I find and then a minister that was crazy during COVID. So I find that I do have time and don't mind educating on the North.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for yeah, certainly. Yeah, reach out to me. I'd love to correspond more and talk about the demand side, capabilities and so forth. So yeah, well, thank you, and I guess we'll move on next to Norm Normand.